Hello, hello. We are meeting again for chapter 3 of Women Who Run with the Wolves. I am Dr. Sarah, guiding you through the next about 20 minutes or so. And I'm very excited to share this one because chapter 3 happens to be my personal favorite chapter of the book. And it is also subtitled Retrieval of Intuition as Initiation. And it tells the story of Vasalisa and Baba Yaga. So, this story shows exactly how the intuition can change the outcome of your life. It also explains the right progression of where intuition comes from, how it's developed, but also how to utilize it. The power of intuition is that it can tell you what path to take when you reach a fork in the road, but also have the foresight to let you know that most things are not as they seem. When intuition is developed, one can be considered initiated into womanhood. Estes quotes, "We trust all our senses to wring the truth from things, to extract nourishment from our own ideas, to see what there is to see, and to know what there is to know, to be the keepers of our creative fires, and have the intimate knowing about the life cycle of all nature." So as I find the chapter to read to you guys, I just want to start by saying that it is a little bit long, so just kind of bear with me here. So once there was, and once there was not, a young mother who lay on her deathbed, her face pale as the white wax roses in the sacristy of church nearby. Her young daughter and her husband sat at the end of her old wooden bed and prayed that God would guide her safely into the next world. The dying mother called to Vasilisa. The little child in red boots and white apron knelt at her mother's side. "Here's a doll for you, my love," my mother whispered, and from the hairy coverlet she pulled a tiny doll which, like Vasilisa herself, was dressed in red boots, white apron, black skirt, and vest embroidered all over with colored thread. "Here are my last words, beloved," said the mother. "Should you lose your way or be in need of help, ask this doll what to do. You will be assisted. Keep the doll with you always. Do not tell anyone about her. Feed her when she is hungry. This is my mother's promise to you. My blessing on you, dear daughter." And with that, the mother's breath fell into the depths of her body, where it gathered up her soul and rushed out from between her lips, and the mother was dead. The child and her father mourned for a very long time. But like the field cruelly plowed under by war, the father's life rose green from the furrows again, and he married a widow with two daughters. Although the new stepmother and her daughters spoke in polite tones and always smiled like ladies, there was something of the rodent behind their smiles, which Vasilisa's father did not perceive. Sure enough, when the three women were alone with Vasilisa, they tormented her, forced her to wait on them, sent her to chop wood so her lovely skin would become blemished. They hated her because she had a sweetness about her that was otherworldly. She was also very beautiful. Her breasts were bounding while theirs dwindled from meanness. She was helpful and uncomplaining, while the stepmother and stepsisters were among themselves like rats in the offal pile at night. One day, the stepmother and stepsisters simply could not stand Vasilisa any longer. "Let us conspire to make the fire go out, and then let us send Vasilisa into the forest to Baba Yaga, the witch, to beg fire for our hearth. And when she reaches Baba Yaga, well, the old Baba Yaga will kill her and eat her." "Oh," they clapped and squeaked like things that live in the dark. So that evening, when Vasilisa came home from gathering wood, the entire house was dark. She was very concerned and inquired of her stepmother, "What has happened? What will we have to cook with? What will we do to light the darkness? The stepmother admonished, "You stupid child, obviously we have no fire, and I can't go out into the woods because I am old. My daughters can't go because they are afraid. So you are the only one who can go out into the forest to find Baba Yaga and get a coal to start our fire again." Vasilisa replied innocently, "Well, all right, yes, I'll do that." So she set out. The woods became darker and darker, and sticks cracked under her feet, frightening her. She reached down into the long, deep pocket of her apron, and there was the doll her dying mother had given her. And Vasilisa patted the doll in her pocket and said, "Just touching this doll, yes, I feel better." And at every fork in the road, Vasilisa reached into her pocket and consulted the doll. "Well, should I go left or should I go right?" The doll indicated yes or no, or this way or that way. And Vasilisa fed the doll some of her bread as she walked and followed what she felt was emanating from the doll. Suddenly, a man in white on a horse galloped by, and it became daylight. Further on, a man in red sauntered by on a red horse, and the sun rose. Vasilisa walked and walked, and just as she came to the hovel of Baba Yaga, a rider dressed in black came trotting on a black horse and rode right into Baba Yaga's hut. Swiftly it became night. The fence, made of skulls and bones surrounding the hut, began to blaze with an inner fire, so the clearing there in the forest glowed with an eerie light. Now the Baba Yaga was a very fearsome creature. She traveled not in a chariot, not in a coach, but in a cauldron shaped like a mortar, which flew along all by itself. She rode this vehicle with an oar shaped like a pestle, and all the while she swept out the tracks of where she had been with a broom made from the hair of a person long dead. And the cauldron flew through the sky with Baba Yaga's own greasy hair flying behind. Her long chin curved up and her long nose curved down, and they met in the middle. She had a tiny white goatee and warts on her skin from her trade in toads. Her brown stained fingernails were thick and ridged like roofs, and so curled over she could not make a fist. Even more strange was the Baba Yaga's house. It sat on top of a huge, scaly, yellow chicken legs and walked about all by itself, and sometimes twirled around and around like an ecstatic dancer. The bolts on the doors and shutters were made of human fingers and toes, and the lock on the front door was a snout with many pointed teeth. Vasilisa consulted her doll and asked, "Is this the house we seek?" And the doll, in its own way, answered, "Yes, this is what you seek." And before she could take another step, Baba Yaga and her cauldron descended on Vasilisa and shouted down at her, "What do you want?" And the girl trembled. "Grandmother, I come for fire. My house is cold. My people will die. I need fire." Baba Yaga snapped, "Oh, yes, I know you and your people. Well, you useless child, you let the fire go out. That's an ill-advised thing to do. And besides, what makes you think I should give you the flame?" Vasilisa consulted her doll quickly and replied, "Because I ask." Baba Yaga purred, "You're lucky. That is the right answer." And Vasilisa felt very lucky she had given the right answer. Baba Yaga threatened, "I cannot possibly give you fire until you've done work for me. And if you perform these tasks for me, you shall have the fire. And if not," and here Vasilisa saw Baba Yaga's eyes turn suddenly into red cinders, "if not, my child, you shall die." So Baba Yaga rumbled into the hovel and laid down upon her bed and ordered Vasilisa to bring her what was cooking in the oven. In the oven was enough food for 10 people, and the Yaga ate it all, leaving just a tiny crust and a thimble of soup for Vasilisa. "Wash my clothes, sweep the yard, and clean my house. Prepare my food and separate the mildewed corn from the good corn, and see that everything is in order. I will be back to inspect your work later. If it is not done, you will be my feast." And with that, Baba Yaga flew off in her cauldron with her nose as the windsock and her hair as the sail, and it became night again. Vasilisa turned to her doll, and soon as the Yaga had gone, "What shall I do? Can I complete these tasks in time?" The doll assured her she could, and to eat a little, and to go to sleep. Vasilisa fed the doll a little too, and then slept. In the morning, the doll had done all the work, and all that remained was the meal to be cooked. And in the evening, the Yaga returned and found nothing undone. Pleased in a way, but not pleased because she could find no fault, Baba Yaga sneered, "You are a very lucky girl." She then called on her faithful servants to grind the corn, and 3 pairs of hands appeared in midair and began to rasp the crushed corn. The chaff flew in the house like a golden snow. Finally, it was done, and Baba Yaga sat down to eat. She ate for hours and ordered Vasilisa on the morrow to again clean the house, sweep the yard, and launder her clothes. The Yaga pointed to a great mound of dirt in the yard. In that pile of dirt are many poppy seeds, millions of poppy seeds. And I want in the morning to have one pile of poppy seeds and one pile of dirt, all separated out from each other. Do you understand? Vasilisa almost fainted. Oh my, how am I going to do that? She reached into her pocket and the doll whispered, "Don't worry, I will take care of it." That night, Baba Yaga snored off to sleep, and Vasilisa tried to pick the poppy seeds out of the dirt. And after a time, the doll said to her, "Sleep now, all will be well." Again, the doll accomplished these tasks, and when the old woman returned home, all was done. Baba Yaga spoke sarcastically through her nose. Well, lucky for you that you were able to do these things. She called for her faithful servants to press the oil from the poppy seeds, and again 3 pairs of hands appeared and did so. While the Yaga was smearing her lips with grease from her stew, Vasilisa stood nearby. "What are you staring at?" barked Baba Yaga. "May I ask you some questions, grandmother?" asked Vasilisa. "Ask," ordered the Yaga. "But remember, too much knowledge can make a person old too soon." Vasilisa asked about the white man on a horse. "Aha," said Yaga fondly. "That is my day. And the red man on the horse? Ah, that is my rising sun. And the black man on the black horse? Ah, yes, that is the third, and he is my night." "I see, Vasilisa." Come, come, child, wouldn't you like to ask more questions?" wheedled the Yaga. Vasilisa was about to ask the pair of hands that appeared and disappeared, but the doll began to jump up and down in her pocket. So instead, Vasilisa said, "No, grandmother. As you yourself say, to know too much can make one old too soon." "Ah," said the Yaga, cocking her head like a bird. "You are wiser than your years, my girl. And how did you come to be this way?" "By the blessings of my mother," smiled Vasilisa. "Blessing?" screeched Baba Yaga. "Blessing? We need no blessings around this house. You'd best be on your way, daughter." She pushed Vasilisa out into the night. "I'll tell you what, child, here." Baba Yaga took a skull with fiery eyes from her fence and put it on a stick. "Here, take the skull on a stick home with you. There's your fire. Don't say another word. Just be on your way." Vasilisa began to thank the Yaga, but the little doll in her pocket began to jump up and down, and Vasilisa realized she might just take the fire and go. She ran for home through the dark forest, following the turns and twists in the road as the doll told her which way to go. Vasilisa came through the forest, carrying the skull with fires blazing from its ears, eyes, nose, and mouth holes. Suddenly she became frightened of its weight and its eerie light, and thought to throw it away, but the skull spoke to her and urged her to calm herself and to continue towards the home of her stepmother and stepsisters, and this she did. As Vasilisa came nearer and nearer to her house, her stepmother and stepsisters looked out the window and saw a strange glow dancing through the woods. Closer and closer it came. They could not imagine what it could be. They had decided that Vasilisa's long absence meant she was dead by now, and her bones dragged away by animals and good riddance. Vasilisa advanced closer and closer to home, and as the stepmother and stepsisters saw it was her, they ran to her, saying that they had been without fire since she left, and no matter how hard they tried to start one, it always went out. Vasilisa entered the house feeling triumphant, for she had survived her dangerous journey and brought fire back to her home. But the skull on the stick watched the stepsisters and the stepmother's every move and burned into them. And by morning, it had burnt the wicked trio into cinders. And that concludes the story. So I think that Vasalisa is a story of handing down the blessings on women's power of intuition from mother to daughter, from one generation to the next great power. It's also a story about intuition and is composed of lightning fast inner seeing, inner hearing, inner sensing, and inner knowing. Estes explains the significance of the story through 9 tasks. So, through completing these tasks, a woman's intuition is to reset the psyche. That is the point of these stories and exactly how to do that. The goal is a loving and trusting relationship with this psyche, being whom we have called the knowing woman. So, the first task that Estes talks about has to do with allowing the too good mother to die. This means that there must be an acceptance that the ever watchful, hovering, protective psychic mother is not adequate as a central guide for one's future instinctual life. So, when the too good mother is no longer making orders, the daughter must take on the task of being and developing one's own intuition about danger and direction. Allowing to be constantly guided begins to prevent us from responding to new challenges and not breaking free from somebody else's dream, aka the mother's. So if we stay too long with that protective mother, we find ourselves impeding all challenges to ourselves and therefore blocking further development. She must set herself up for something she's willing to reach and therefore take risks for. She is able to sharpen her intuition with this process. And often we hear voices within our minds which encourage us to hold back and stay safe. These are the frightened voices telling us to stay safe and comfortable and not get into positions of uncertainty. Those are the voices are of you don't have enough time, you're not good enough, you can't go and be a success. You should stay at home where it's comfortable. Those sort of voices. This can also be represented as the voice of the too good mother in a safe home, though. So, not only does the too good mother actually represent a mother or just being protected, it also means the limiting thoughts that you think about yourself. So, now death or dying, I constantly will use throughout this explanation, but I'm using this word to describe something that is needing to just fly on its own. For example, a bird who needs to fly out of their nest, and sometimes if it doesn't fly, then it will die. So, what I'm trying to say is, in death in this case, and when I talk about dying or death, if I use that word, it's more of a cutting the cord from the mother's umbilical, and it is it is up to the woman to figure out their own self-discovery and experience without the influence of the mother's watchful eye or your negative thoughts about or limiting thoughts. So the first steps into independence is learning to let die what must die. This means to let die the values and attitudes within the psyche which no longer sustains the newly independent woman. So while there is always her mother's warmth in the core, this natural psychic transition leaves the newly initiated woman on her own in a world that may not be motherly to her. The too good mother has blessed her daughter with intuition and taught her all she could about intuition and the world, even though the too good mother cannot live to influence her beyond a certain point. So she blesses Vasilisa with a doll. So the doll actually represents the intuition that is being passed on, and this is a proper way that intuition is passed on. So to know that no one is ever completely ready for this time. No one's ready to be away from their protective mother. No one is ever ready to take on and start to listen to their intuition. but something is waiting for us to grasp, and it is our fate to go out there and get it for ourselves. It is normal for someone to want to keep that comfort and that protective life, but it is our duty as a wild woman to dive in and stand whatever happens next. It is time to learn to hunt and learn what we can really do, what our potential is. And as the too good mother dies, the new woman is actually born, which is you. The second task, finding that being good, being sweet, and being nice will not cause life to sing. So, estes means here, and this can be interpreted as making the best relationship one can with the worst parts of oneself. So, ultimately, working towards letting the old self die and the new intuitive self be born. This is the idea of letting go of one's past, one's obedience, and one's naiveness. The stepmother and stepsisters represent in this story the undeveloped but cruel elements of the psyche. For instance, the negative material that can be actually quite positive in the long run if it's observed and perceived correctly. So, for instance, um, a woman's truth would be hidden if they weren't forced to be cut loose uh, by the negative words that we tell ourselves. So we need those negativities, because once we're able to be cut loose, we erupt and finally find our identity and its aspects, and we're made into a stronger and wiser being. That is, to be ourselves causes us to be exiled by many others, and yet to comply with what others want causes us to be exiled from ourselves. The role of the stranger or the outcast is usually played by one who is most deeply connected to the knowing nature, says Estes. So when Vasilisa's stepfamily gets into her head with saying that she is not good enough, she can only do simple things, she is stupid, she can't do it, she had let those words penetrate her because she has not actually fully discovered her powers yet. So, in order for her to regain her life, or something different, something life giving must occur. She can't be living in the same patterns and expect things to change. She has to change the patterns so that things can actually change. So, the reward for being too nice and simply, her family still mistreats her and will still mistreat her all the more if she doesn't change. So sometimes women who are raised in oppressive families set off on long quests over and over, and they don't know why other than to get praise for their family. They'll go off and hike Everest, they'll go get a college degree, they will go start a business, or they'll do humanitarian work just for praise from their family, to make them proud and to prove to their family that they're worthy. But this ideation, in fact, impedes the initiation into their power. The submission would only drain you and cause you to settle into an underserved life. This is because the woman has given up her power, and it's not being led by her intuition of what she must do. So, like Vasilisa, this woman who wants to be accepted in her family only needs a guiding light that will differentiate for her what is good and what is not. And she needs to be led into a new life, one which is based on an older, wiser kind of inner knowing. So then we can move on to the third task, which is consenting to venture into the locus of deep initiation. So this is actually when Vasilisa enters the forest and beginning to experience the new and dangerous feeling of being in one's intuitive power. So learning to develop sensitivity to direction, it is the intuition, and that is learning how to figure out where the intuition is truly guiding you. So this choice to venture into the forest to find Baba Yaga is also the learning of the way back home into their wild nature. And this cannot be taught, but experienced, felt, and trusted. In the story, the doll completes all the tasks that Baba Yaga wants them to do. And this represents the actual shifting of power to the doll, or the doll meaning intuition. So the psyche works as we sleep. And as Vasilisa tries to do all of that she can, she still can't possibly do all of it. So the doll does it for her, even though she has the best intentions. And so intuition does work also as we are sleeping. We sleep for 8 to 12 hours a day, and maybe less for some people, but our unconscious is still working for us. We can still have intention for what our goals are and our vision is, and that can still be brought to us in our sleep, just like intuition can. And like a muscle, if intuition isn't being used, it withers. Without food, without employment, it atrophies. This is the thing that must be handed down from woman to woman. This is a blessed binding or testing and feeding for the intuition, and it needs to be nurtured in that way. So if intuition is handed down correctly, a woman is in fact being taught to thrive. Although the too good mother has to step aside her power over her daughter, the too good mother also was able to pass down the appropriate knowledge of intuition to her daughter to properly bloom. And to properly bloom also you have to allow the intuition to do its job and learn what that intuition may mean to you. So the fourth task is described as being able to stand the face of fearsome wild goddess without wavering, familiarizing oneself with the odd. So bringing some of her values into our lives, thereby coming ourselves a little odd in a good way. Learning to face great power in others and subsequently one's own power, letting the frail and the too sweet child die back even further. So even Baba Yaga's house being so joyous and bursting and moving, that represents the actual psychic space that we both use consciously and unconsciously. It's the fundamentals of being a wild woman, the joy, the enthusiasm, the aliveness. And Baba Yaga actually represents just somebody or a woman with great power. Even though she is threatening, she is just. So you must respect the face and being in presence of a great power. These are lessons for the woman to stand in that face of power, because ultimately some part of that power will become hers. The woman must present herself honestly and just as herself. To face this wild and creative power in ourselves is to gain access to the divine wild nature of the feminine. These belong to us innately, and we may choose to inhibit whichever one serves us best at whichever time. But sometimes this great power woman stands as someone we look up to, or sometimes this great power is someone who rubs us the wrong way. So, either way, there is a lesson to be taught with stepping into the power of being a wild woman, to be able to stand the scrutiny, to be able to stand your ground, speak your truth with confidence, and to be humbled when appropriate. And Estes puts it perfectly. So, to be strong does not mean to sprout muscles and flex. It means meeting one's own numinosity without fleeing, actively living with the wild nature in one's own way. It means to be able to learn, to be able to stand what we know. It means to stand to live. Which brings us to our fifth task, which is described as coming to recognize her power and the powers of inner purifications, unsoiling, sorting, nourishing, building energy and ideas, aka washing the Yaga's clothes, cooking for her, cleaning her house, and sorting out the elements. So when Vasilisa is washing the clothes, it means to purify and drench and permeate with a spiritual mystery. It is the renewal and revivifying rediscovering self in the water of what we really hold to be true and what we hold to be sacred. We learn to soak, mend, and renew the combinations of qualities. We learn how to sort, mend, and renew the instinctive psyche through purification, the washing of fibers of our being. The sweeping means to get uncluttered, the uncluttering mind, and making sure that the head is clear. This is the uncluttering clarity is found, and then when there is uncluttering, there is room for contemplation. To clean is to value the non-superficial life and care for its orderliness. Sometimes women become so confused about their soulful work and neglect its architecture. So sweeping will prevent this from occurring. It's similar to when in yoga when you hold the warrior two pose and you realize that you're putting your energy or in shooting out forward, or your arm in the back is dropping. It means that you're not paying attention to that present moment, and you're pushing in one direction too much. It needs to just be clear, and making sure that you're kind of staying in that present moment and not being superficial with how you are practicing, because you're being in that present moment, doing what you should be doing in that posture. So when Vasilisa is cooking, uh, the cooking part is actually represented with the fire, and that fire that burns hot with passion, desire, ideas, and words of what she truly loves. It is nourishing, but also requires watching and constantly testing, and it also comes in stages. It is the cooking up of completely original things, directions, of commitments to one's own art or work. Without the fire, great ideas, original thoughts, or yearnings and longings remain uncooked. So this is one of my favorite quotes and ideas to make sure that it is written in here. So through these chores, Baba Yaga teaches, and Vasilisa learns not to cringe away from the big, the mighty, the cyclical, the unforeseen, the unexpected, the vast and grand scale, which is the size of nature, the odd, the strange, and the unusual. To cleanse one's thinking, renewing one's values on a regular basis. To clear one's psyche of trivia, sweeps one's self, cleans up one's thinking and feelings state on a regular basis. To build up enduring fire beneath the creative life and cook up ideas on a systematic basis means especially to cook with originality a lot of unprecedented life in order to feed the relationship between oneself and the wildish nature. Moving on to the sixth task. So learning to make fine distinctions in judgment, observing the power of the unconscious mind and how it works even when the ego is not aware. More learning about life and death. So the garden is a meditation practice that of seeing when it is time for something to die. In the garden, one can see the time coming back into fruition. In the garden, one is moving with rather than against the inhalations and exhalations of a greater wild nature. We have the ability to infuse energy and strengthen life and to stand out of the way of what dies. This task has to do with being able to make distinctions about categorizing things, what needs, and deciding whether something needs to be progressed or something that needs to be let go, and being able to finely distinct that is represented as the poppy seeds and the dirt, and being able to differentiate those two even though they are so similar and fine. Making those judgments are the difference between progressing and not. The seventh task has to do with learning to understand the truth about the cycles of elements in the wildest nature. So this has to do with the different colored horsemen. The black, red, and white horsemen are the representation of old ideas of deceit, scent, death, and rebirth. These colors are also representing the dissolving of one's own old values, sacrificing one's precisely held intuitions, and the white as the new light, the new knowing that comes from having experienced the first two. To understand the cycle is to not become enveloped in one of them. We do not want to become enraptured and thereby trapped in one of the cycles, or else all else halts as well. You have to go through the whole cycles. You can't be in one forever. Momentous or mundane, the discrimination is one of the most difficult things to learn, for it takes spirit, will, and soulfulness, and it often means holding out for what one wants. And that is also involved with making sure that the cycle is respected. The idea is to have consulted the instinctual self through one or several aspects that are available to you. The eighth task is taking on immense power to see and affect others, looking at one's life situation by this new light. With a lack of intuition, there is a lack of sensitivity to cycles, or not following one's knowing, which causes choices to turn out poorly. Intuition gives direction and finds clarity of motives, ideas, actions, and words for our power. So this is represented as the skull. So the bones were recognized as the agents for calling the spirits, the skulls being the most sacred part. It is Vasilisa's inner knowing and taking on her power as the skull. She has served the hag of the psyche, or Baba Yaga, fed her the great relationship and purified the persona of it and kept clear thinking. She has gotten to know this wild feminine force by doing that and its habits. She learned to differentiate and to separate the distinction from thoughts and different feelings. She has learned to recognize the great wild power in her own psyche. She has learned about the life-death life cycle and need not lack in confidence or power. She goes forward in life, feet in place surely, into a new life through the new skull, new life. And the last task, the ninth, is represented using one's acute vision to recognize and react to the negative shadows of one's own psyche and negative shadow of the outer world. So recasting the negative shadows in one's psyche with the Yaga fire, the blaze of knowing. That's what the fire represents in the skull, is the blaze of knowing. So each woman who retrieves her intuition and the great powers reaches a point where she is tempted to throw them away, but knowing the skull light is forgiving. You can't go back once you know. Once you have the intuition, you will not be able to disregard them. Yet when one sees and senses thusly, then one has to work to do something about what one sees. To possess good intuition, goodly power, is work, striving in the gathering up of will in order to do something about what one sees for good or balance. It is true, it is hard to hold the skull light out before us sometimes, for with it we clearly see all sides of ourselves and others, both the disfigured and the divine, and all conditions in between. It can determine motives, personality, and intention with the consciousness and unconsciousness. If you are not vested in the intuitive, you may think you have one choice and that it seems like an undesirable one. And perhaps you feel that you ought to suffer about it and submit and force yourself to do the mundane or what doesn't align with your purpose because you are trying to protect others or you don't think that you could possibly pursue something other than the mundane. No, there's a better way. So listen to the inner hearing, seeing, and being and follow it. It knows what to do next. They are critical of blockages and mistaken intentions in and around your creative, sensual, spiritual, and intellectual self. Their purpose is to help you follow the trail the wild woman has left behind, for it is the way of retaining and developing your soul. The one who dares, creates, and who destroys is the power of the wild woman. She is the primitive and the intellectual soul that makes all creative acts and arts possible. Perhaps recognizing intuition is the easier of the tasks, but holding it in consciousness and letting live what can live and letting die what must die is by far the most strenuous, yet so satisfying. And as adults, we need little permission, but rather more encouraging of the wild cycles as the original vision of purpose. We need to make sure that we are respecting the cycles and the life death life cycle, the cycles within ourselves, and make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable for working on our own intuitions and what that may mean for ourselves. We also need to make sure that we are standing our ground in the presence of a strong woman or a woman that we respect or maybe don't respect. Either way, we can learn from these lessons that are in front of us. And all we have to do is be our authentic selves in the situation and make sure we keep our composure, hold our ground, and keep on going with our intuition and what that may mean. So, thank you so much for being a part of this talk about intuition. And some reflection questions I have for you this week is, what do I long for? What do I crave for? What do I desire? Where in your life are you indecisive or wish you had guidance? Who in your life do you admire, and what do you think you would learn if you were to be a student of theirs? And lastly, who in your life may rub you the wrong way, but you have learned lessons from? So thank you so much and have a great rest of your week.